Welcome to the Workbench and welcome to another episode of Wheels Wings TV. Today we have the new 1/48 scale Avro Lancaster from HK Models. Let's have a look. First up, we have our left and right wings, which are in upper and lower halves and actually fit very snug. The 32nd scale Lancaster, of course, had the upper and lower wing halves molded as one piece through some clever slide molding, although on some examples that did result in some thin areas. Of course, we have some beautiful engraved panel lines and rivets across the entire surface where appropriate. Very, very nice. We do not have posable ailerons. They are fixed in place, but they look pretty good. First, we have the tops of the engine cowlings molded with the upper wing. Big chunk of sprue on the lower wing, which I'll have to remove. The little bulges here, which were separate on the 32nd, are molded in place on the 48. And unlike 32nd scale, they did not cheat and mirror the wings, so we have our landing lights appropriately only under the left wing, and our dinghy hatch only on the upper half of the right wing. The 32nd scale, upper half of the wing was mirrored and the lower half of the wing was mirrored, which was a bit of a pain because it was not easy to fix that without having to rescribe lots of detail. But off to a good start here so far. Of course, these pieces come stuck together in the box, so testament to the good fit there. And of course we do have separate flaps. HK's very, very nice surface detail on good display. Next up, we have our left and right fuselage halves, which, unlike the 32nd scale kit, are molded continuous from nose to tail. It did not have a separate forward fuselage. Once again, covered in lots and lots of recessed rivets and recessed panel lines, which look absolutely amazing. Some pretty chunky, I think these are basically a sprue attachment. They just kind of lop them off in production, but just have to clean those up flush and nip off all these ejection pin pieces here, and those will be nice and clean. They did carry over from the 32nd scale kit the lug that the wings mount onto, so you just slide it over and slide it backwards and it locks the wings in place. Makes it relatively sturdy, although if you are hanging this and you don't have any support under the wing, it does like to bend down over time a little bit. Nice deep sockets for the elevators to lock into. And of course, structural detail throughout the interior, which I think is a little pointless because unless you're doing a cutaway, or if they would have done a clear version, you're not going to see anything pretty much behind the cockpit. Unless, of course, you had the hatch here open, in which case you could get away with about 3 centimeters either side of detail because you can't see any more. But no sense complaining, that's how they decided to do it. No big deal. Of course, the big thing to commend them on is not a single ejector pin anywhere in any of that molded detail. So yeah, it's kind of pointless that they did it, but hey, they did it the right way, I'll give them that much. And we have our bomb bay doors, recessed panel lines and rivets on the outside, raised rivets on the inside, and unfortunately some ejector pin marks as well. So apparently whatever magic they pulled on the inside of the fuselage, they couldn't replicate it on here. So if you're doing the bomb bay closed, no issue. If you're going to have it open, a little bit of time with sanding stick or maybe one of those fiberglass pencils and just smooth those out and everything should be fine. These are the standard bomb bay doors. If you wanted to do an early Canadian Mark 10, you would need the bulged bomb bay doors. I believe Belcher Bits might be working on something for us there, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But as it is, you have to do a regular Lancaster out of the box. Next sprue, we've got our fairing around the mid-upper turret, as well as the blanking plate if we were to do a dam buster. Of course, if you wanted to build this as a post-war Canadian Mark 10, you can stick this in and fair it over. Various bits for our nose and tail turrets. Got all of our 30 caliber machine guns here, which are relatively nice. Don't have hollow muzzles, but do look presentable. You could always get some brass or resin replacements for those if you so choose. We do have the extra air scoop that would go on the side of the fuselage, so if you did want to do one of those post-war Lancasters, you've got that included. Along with, you got our, I believe that's the Monica antennas there that go on the side of the nose. Various other bits and pieces. I believe these are the balloon cable cutters that are installed along the leading edge of the wing. I think those were only on the very earliest Lancasters. I don't know how long those lasted in production. Looks pretty good, nice and clean, no real flash, no super prominent mold lines. So cleanup should be pretty straightforward. Next sprue, we've got some more of our interior pieces. We have our cockpit area. So it'll be the pilot's platform up here. Navigator, flight engineer, wireless operator be all down here. Got the engineer's panel here, various bulkheads, tail wheel fork, some seats, various electronic boxes and panels. Got the struts for our open bomb bay doors. We've got our little intakes for the side of the engine cowling. Now, the little bit on the front here would have been a mesh grill, so you might want to replace those with some photo etch. Nice bulkhead here, some oxygen bottles and some various little greeblies. We have our bomb aimer's window that goes under the nose, I believe the earlier square one, the later rounded one. We've got the two halves of our tail wheel, control wheel, some horn balances, I believe, for the rudders. Nice, cleanly molded. Of course, not a lot of this is going to be on display, so don't have to fuss about it too much. Next we have our bomb bay roof, which looks pretty clean. I believe they've hidden the ejector pins on some of these bomb mounting points. Now you don't get as many bombs as in the 32nd scale kit, so probably just hopefully somebody will do some bomb hard points, maybe in resin or photo etch, so you can kind of, if you wanted to have an empty bomb bay, you could at least still have the attachment points for the bombs. I have some of the mechanisms for the operation of the flaps themselves, roof of the main wheel bays. We've got our radiator cowlings. Now there's some arguments about the shape of these. There were at least 2 variations of radiator/radiator cowling on the Lancaster. The later Lancasters and pretty much anything that survived post-war received a larger radiator that was designed originally for the Mark 7s because they were supposed to serve in the Pacific, so they gave them larger radiators. If you look at some of the pictures of wartime Lancasters, the cowling kind of comes around a lot more at the front. So whether these are 100% accurate for a wartime Mark 1, Mark 3 might be debatable, but if you're going to be doing a Mark 10 or a Mark 7, these should be quite accurate. Have our instrument panel, some lovely molded detail. That's much better detailed than the 32nd scale panel. That was pretty pathetic. Got our shrouds for the exhausts. Definitely thinned down the edges of those a little bit, because they weren't metal, if I'm not mistaken. These were a like fiberglass or perhaps asbestos or some sort of composite construction to withstand the heat. More of the little side scoops for the engine cowlings. Of course, need some mesh screens for the front. Some bulkheads. I believe these are for our engine cowlings. Overall pretty good. Ejector pins on the back and out of the way where we won't notice them, which is always good. You got some inside the exhaust shrouds here, but you're never going to see those, so no sense worrying about it. Now there should be some prominent holes in this section, because all this structure would continue underneath, and this was just a thin piece of sheet metal. So that's not perfectly represented there, but it's usable. So you're not going to see a lot, especially if you have a 4,000-pound blockbuster stuck in the middle there. Next sprue is a duplicate. Got our main wheels. They have a nice little flat spot molded in, and a little bit of concentric detail going around the sidewall there. These are ball tires, as would be appropriate for wartime. Got our propeller spinners. Got 2 representations of Merlin engines. Their exhausts, superchargers, rocker covers. I got our radiators and our landing gear legs. If I'm not mistaken, this section here and here is a lock or a locking piece that you see on typically on museum examples, especially static ones. Adds a little bit more strength to the landing gear if it's going to be sitting for a long time. Apparently not something you see off at all on wartime ones. But say if you're doing the Minarsky Memorial Lancaster, when she is parked in the hangar, she does have these stiffening pieces added in, and they're usually painted bright red so they don't forget about them, because your landing gear are not coming up if this is left in place. Now, this kit is labeled a Mark I Lancaster. However, the only tangible difference between a Mark I and a Mark III Lancaster are the engines. A Mark I Lancaster was built with Rolls-Royce Merlins. A Mark III was built with Packard license-built Merlin engines. Much like the Spitfire, the only real practical difference between a Mark IX and a Mark XVI was a Mark IX was Rolls-Royce engines, a Mark XVI was Packard engines. The aircraft were given different designations because you would need different sets of tools to work on a Rolls-Royce versus a Packard engine. So even though the box says Mark I, if an aircraft you want to build is a Mark III, you can still build it out of this kit, no issue there. Next, we have our engine cowlings, and thankfully they are all molded pretty much in one piece, unlike the 32nd scale Lancaster, which had all of these panels separately. So if you want to show off the Merlin engines on this kit, you simply cut along these lines, pop the panels off, and no problem. A lot easier than trying to have everything line up and be nice and neat. Not that these panels fit particularly well on the real aircraft, but we have, of course, our structural elements here on the inner wing. So when you look up into the landing gear bay, you can see some of that structure. This was just a solid piece on the 32nd scale kit, so that's a nice little detail. Thankfully, no ejector pins on the inside of our wheel well doors. No detail at all, but hey, at least there's no ejector pins. Looks pretty good. Now there are a couple of attachment points on each cowling here for the exhaust shrouds. So if you're doing an aircraft that has these shrouds removed, you're going to have to fill these in, but no big deal. And we have our horizontal and vertical tail surfaces along with our landing flaps. And also we now have the left and right sides appropriately done. With the 32nd scale kit, you got the left side was both of the top halves and the right side was both the bottom halves, so all these little accent points were only on one side and not on both sides. It wasn't something hard to fix, but it definitely took a lot of effort. So these are all correctly done. Of course, we have our elevator molded in place. That's not separate, but we do have a commendably deep hinge point here, so that's going to look realistic with a wash in there. It'll look like it's a separate piece. And a very subtle, very restrained fabric effect on the elevators here. Rudders also joined with the vertical tail, not separate. Although we do have a nice deep hinge line, which I always like to see. Beautiful rivets and panel lines on both sides. Flaps, more beautiful panel lines and rivets. And thankfully no big ejector pins on the inside, at least where they're not going to be seen, which is always good. Next we have our propeller blades, ×2 sprues, and this is my first complaint with the kit. These are the only propeller blades you get. The Lancaster had two types, the needle propellers, which we have here, and the paddle bladed propellers, which they introduced later on. This severely limits which aircraft you can do. The 32nd scale kit included the paddle bladed propellers. I don't know why they elected to only include one type of propeller blade in this kit, because even though it's a Mark I, you would see paddle-bladed propellers on Mark Is. It was not a trait specific to a Mark I Lancaster. So if you wanted to do a post-war Canadian Mark X, or even a late production Canadian Mark X, you would need the paddle blade propellers. If you want to do some of the wartime aircraft, you would need paddle blade propellers. So they've kind of throttled the creativity you have with this kit by only giving you one type of propeller blade. Hopefully, subsequent releases of this kit will include paddle bladed propellers, and if not, hopefully somebody like Quick Boost or one of the other aftermarket companies will maybe have a set of paddle bladed propellers for this kit. I did do some reading, and supposedly the paddle bladed propellers on the Lancaster were the same as on the de Havilland Mosquito. So if you've got a couple of Tamiya Mosquitoes kicking around and you're not using the paddle blades out of those, you could probably steal those. Or if you have an old Tamiya kit that you're not going to build, steal the paddle bladed propellers out of that. But out of the box, you've only got needle bladed propellers, so make sure you do your research, and if you can find pictures of a particular plane you're trying to do, make sure it's got the right propeller blades. And finally, we have our Ordnance. We've got our 500-pound bombs, and we've got our 4,000-pound blockbuster, or cookie, if you prefer. This is kind of an atypical loadout for the Lancaster. British bombers more often carried a full load of incendiaries instead of high explosive. Often they'd have 12 small bomb carriers full of incendiaries and a single 4,000-pounder. Although if they were attacking a specific heavy industry target or something that was much more hardened, they would go with full high explosive. But the code name for the incendiary loadout was usual, which should give an idea of how often they used incendiary loads. Now, if you want a different bomb load other than what they give you in the kit, there are several options from Belcher Bits for different high capacity bombs, for incendiaries and whatnot. You can check his website out for those, or you can check out the Wheels Wings Estore. We have those all listed online as well. And we have our clear sprue, which has got some nice little cling wrap on the tail turret and on the H2S dome. None on the big canopy, but seems to have arrived unscathed. Now, fortunately, unlike the 32nd scale kit where they had you gluing these blisters onto the side windows, they have thoughtfully molded the two different types, which is nice. We've got our shallow and our deep bomb aimer's blister. Now, unfortunately, they have not marked the area of clear versus painted on the H2S dome. On the 32nd scale kit, the rear half was frosted, so you know which to paint and which to not. The rearmost section here was left clear because it landed over top of the formation lights. But quick little Google search and some measuring and you can figure out where that's supposed to go. Beautifully clear, shiny plastic. The framing is slightly texture or matted so you can more easily see it. Nice sharp line. Make masking very easy if you're not using a pre-cut set. Tail turret molded in one piece. Now if you want a little touch of authenticity, a lot of tail gunners would remove large portions of perspex from the turret. Less chance of it fogging up at high altitude, less chance of weird glares and reflections. Now, it did mean you were sitting out in the cold slipstream a bit more, but if that meant you got eyes on a German night fighter before he got eyes on you, all the better. Fairly good, no distortion to speak of in the main cockpit canopy. Tail turret is quite good. Little Little bit in the nose turret, but that's not too bad. Bomb aimer's blisters, very clear. And side windows, you're not seeing anything through those, and in fact most Lancasters had those painted out, but those should be quite good. Now we do have okay, no, I thought that might be a bubble in these. That'd be for the landing light, but that's just simply a little recess. So you can put some silver paint in there and it's going to look like you have a light bulb and the reflector. So those look quite good. Maybe a little distortion on some of the smaller windows, but that's not as crucial. You're not really going to be seeing through them. All the big important ones are flaw-free, which is always a good thing. In the last pieces, we have a little photo etch fret with some seat belts, some lap belts, some structure for one of the gun turrets, and the ejection chutes on the tail turret, and a box that sticks out the lower side of the nose, which, if I'm not mistaken, was for chaff. Don't quote me on that. Simple to the point. It's got nice plastic film on both sides, so you can peel it off one, leave it on the other. Then when you nip all your photo etch parts off, they don't go flying into oblivion. Now, anything other than the pilot seat belts probably aren't going to be seen, and I think most people probably replace these with some Edward or other aftermarket, but hey, at least they're giving you an option. And lastly, our instructions. Nice big full color picture of the box art. Lancaster B Mark I. Little blurb on the history of the Lancaster, our symbol legends, health and safety, done in cooperation with AK Interactive and the Large Scale Modeler Forum. Nice 3D render type of instructions, not line drawings. So step one, put our pilot seat together, the back and the very prominent armor plate behind his head, seat cushions, we've got our photo etch belts going in place, and all of our various electronics boxes, radios and whatnot going behind the pilot. So you'd have the, if I'm not mistaken, you'd have the navigator behind the pilot and then the wireless operator behind him next to the main spar. I wouldn't spend a huge amount of time here unless you're going to have something cut open, because you're not really going to see much down in behind the pilot, but detail yours how you see fit. Cockpit section goes onto the roof of the bomb bay with some bits that you'll never see. Front bulkhead with the camera. Another bulkhead with some bits on it. Once again, you're never going to see that. Rear bulkhead of the bomb bay. Got the engineer's panel on the side here. More bits at the rearmost with the floor going to the tail turret. Honestly, you can probably, if you're going for a quick build, you can leave some of these pieces out, because once they go in, they're not seeing the light of day. We've got Some consoles in the nose section, the handrail going down the side here, those were painted bright yellow. Another console panel, got some of our windows all installing from the inside. Got our crew entry hatch here. Got the base for the tail turret. Got our, that's our chaff chute or flare chute. More of our strip windows, more panels. You do have, looks like 2 options of bomb sight. With, oh, okay, and they have photo etch bases, so those are going to look nice and in scale. Cockpit bomb bay interior section gets sandwiched between our left and right fuselage halves. Of course, you want to make sure that all your tests fit a lot, make sure all your clearances, you don't have anything that's going to keep those halves from coming together. And we've got our nose turret, machine guns onto their base, into this front structure, lap belts for the gunner, goes into the base, clear parts go on. I don't know why they mold this rear piece in clear. It was painted, or it was at least metal, so it seems like a waste of engineering, but whatever. You may want to cut off the gun barrels, perhaps, till after painting, so you don't risk breaking them off. If you're going to be using aftermarket ones, cut them off, drill them out, install them at the end. Or if you're doing one of the various post-war configurations, oftentimes you'd still have the turret for an observation post, but they would just pull the machine guns out. Got our mid-upper turret, same thing, machine guns going to their base. These 2 little dinguses here, these had rollers on them, so as the turret traversed, it would engage and raise the guns up so you did not accidentally shoot your tail off, which is always a good thing. Base, gun mount, tub, clear parts go on. Now you could possibly paint these and install them afterwards as well, or glue the whole thing together and just be careful of your gun barrels. And the tail turret, same thing. Guns go into their mounts. Everything builds up onto the base. Clear parts go on. And then lastly, these little chutes for the spent cases, so they fall out right out the back. Like I mentioned, a lot of gunners would remove the, I guess, their front piece here of the turret so they could see out better. Sometimes they would remove, sometimes they would be not a piece of perspex left in the turret, so they had maximum visibility, freeze their butts off, but any edge over the German fighters in terms of eyesight versus cannons was always a good thing. Putting our main canopy together, you get your option of the flat side panels or the blistered ones, so consult your references. We've got our little bench seat here for the bomb aimer. Yes, he was a bomb aimer. The Americans had bombardiers, the British had bomb aimers. With your choice of bomb sight window, the rounder or the square one. Horizontal tail pieces going together, vertical tail pieces. I would suggest leaving those horn balances off until the end because you will break them and you will lose them. Putting our bombs together, top and bottom half with the tail ring. Now these are kind of chunky. You might want to replace those with maybe some thin brass or aluminum tubing or some photo etch perhaps. Or if you're going with a completely different bomb option. It's unfortunate that these are just little pegs that stick into the roof of the bomb bay. You don't have the actual bomb attachment points, so lose a point there. And of course, if you were doing the famous 424 squadron aircraft with the big Easter egg for Hitler art on there, that's going to jazz it up a little bit. We have our tail wheel going in place. You could always leave that off till the end. I believe this is an antenna of some description, but I don't know off the top of my head. Formation lights, and of course if you are putting your H2S dome on, it covers up these forward two lights, so that much would be remaining clear, the rest would be painted. So they don't mark that out, so you might just have to take a few measurements. I believe there's some pictures available online that you can use for reference, assuming the aircraft you're building even has this. Bomb bay doors, and if you're having them closed, you can nip off these little nubbins, glue that in place. Of course, if you're gluing the bomb bay door closed, I wouldn't bother putting the bombs in. Or you leave them open, leave the nubs in place, and then you've got the actuators that glue onto the front and rear bulkheads to keep them open. And we can switch to landscape. The rear cover bulkhead for the nose turret goes in. Your option of the deeper or the shallower bomb aimers blister go in. Now the two little holes that make the little nom-nom face on the front here were for I believe some sort of navigation aid. Not everyone had that. I know with the 32nd scale kit, there was somebody came up with a resin replacement that did not have those. So do some research, see what is applicable to your particular aircraft. Got your escape hatches, the fairing for the mid-upper turret, direction finder loop, and all kinds of various little antennas and sticky outie bits that you will want to leave off until the very end. And of course, you're going to want to do a little bit of visual research to find out if your particular subject had any of these things at all. Gun turrets go in place, glass goes in place. Now, keep in mind if you glue the canopy on before you paint the rest of it, the decking behind the pilot here was painted to match the exterior of the aircraft. So make sure that is going to match whatever you've got going on the outside. Put our vertical and horizontal tail in place. Some more little greeblies. Once again, consult your references. The little fairing that goes around the top of the gun turret. Now you will have to leave that, you can't glue this in and still squeeze that turret in, so this will have to be left off. So you're probably going to want to do lots of test fitting to make sure you get a clean fit here so you can put that on seamlessly after you paint, so you don't have to do a lot of sanding and repair work. And we've got our engines going together. Of course, times 4. 2 halves of the block, upper, lower, exhaust pipes, rocker covers, supercharger, radiator, etc. Now, unlike the 32nd scale kit, you do have to completely build up the engine in order to mount the propellers. So you can't, basically the thing to do there would be simply just do the engine block, the oil pan, radiator, the front, final drive, supercharger, and exhausts. Skip the rockers and skip those little bits you don't really need, especially if you're not having the engine on display. If you're having them on display, obviously put this together and then go to town detailing it with all the plumbing and wiring. Mount that up in your cowling. Radiator goes on, cooling flap goes on. Exhaust shrouds, if you're using them, go on. And then basically repeat that for the opposite side. That's your outer engine, inner engine, same idea. Engine, firewall, all the bulkheads for the wheel well. Upper, lower wing halves go together. Cowlings go onto the wing. Now I would, if you're going to do this thing wheels down, I would do some test fitting to see if you can install the, you should be able to paint this up and install it after, or reduce the chance of breaking things. And if you're doing this wheels down, you do have some notches to cut out on the sides here for the doors. If you're doing it wheels up, obviously don't worry about the landing gear. Cut the nubbins off of the doors and fit them in place. Propellers go onto the front. Now, of course, I would keep those separate until after painting. Flaps go on. Now you can have these, of course, raised or lowered. And if you are doing them lowered, this rearmost part of the engine cowling or engine fairing would tuck up and underneath. So just watch your tolerances there. And wash, rinse, and repeat for the opposite side. Everything the exact same, just mirrored. Then you take these little, I believe these were balloon cable cutters, and they were all over the leading edge. So glue those in place. Now, I think this might be production era dependent. I think this was only on the early Lancasters. I don't believe these were on the later ones. But consult your references as always. And with that, we have a completely finished 148 scale Lancaster, and now got to find a place to put it. Sprue map at the very end, a graphical depiction of our decals, curiously, and our color guide. So first up, W4118ZNY of 106 Squadron RAF in December 42. Left and right sides, top and bottom. Bottom of a Lancaster was black, nothing to see there. There's your camo pattern. Option 2, the always famous POS. Hopefully that did not reflect on the quality of the aircraft. Royal Australian Air Force. This was the most prolific Lancaster. I believe it flew the most operational missions of any Lancaster during the war and has been preserved. May of 1944. Very famous aircraft. Lots of pictures available of this one. And that is your two options. Now, the aftermarket's going to have all kinds of decal options you can choose from to do a specific aircraft. If you want to do one of a couple different Canadian ones, Belcher Bits has a very nice decal sheet available. It features some wartime aircraft and some post-war ones. Guide to all of our various stencils. Walkways, dinghy hatch, and whatnot. I would be tempted to mask these and paint them. And lastly, some color suggestions from AK, Tamiya, and Mr. Hobby. Or take these names and convert them into whatever your favorite paint may be. And lastly, we have our decals. So we've got our aircraft specific ones here. Printed by Cartograph, made in Italy, so good quality decals here. Very, very minimal clear around the edge. None in the middle of that O, which is great. Decals maybe a little thick, but they look pretty thin. So big chunk of clear in the Z here, but you can always come in with a very sharp blade and just trim that out. Just reduce any chance of getting some silvering there. Of course, the infamous "no enemy plane will fly over the Reich territory." The Australians making a little bit of fun of Hermann Goering there. Color looks really good. That British insignia red, for lack of a better term, dull red. Not a color that everybody's able to get good, but this looks pretty close. What am I saying? Pretty close. Looks spot on to me. And our generic markings, our upper wing roundels, fuselage roundels, tail flashes. Got all of our walk lines. Like I said, I would be tempted to mask and paint these along with the other lines, and probably even the dinghy here. These seem a little heavy. And of course we got some nice stencils as well, and something that was conspicuously missing from the 32nd scale kit, some instrument decals for the instrument panel. Now, it would have been nice for them to do the faces of the engineer's panel and some of the radios as well, but at the very least we have the easily seen instrument panel. So if you aren't going to be throwing aftermarket this, at least you get some representation of gauges, which is better than the 32nd scale kit can say. But everything is in register, very glossy. And of course, these are Cartograph decals, so you shouldn't have any issue whatsoever. So, the new 148 scale HK models Avro Lancaster. Definitely an impressive looking kit. If you want a big Lancaster and 1/32 scale is just too big, this one should definitely fit the bill, especially seeing as how they have fixed some of the errors of that kit, notably the dinghy hatch, the landing lights, the horizontal tail, and a few other little bits. So this is definitely a much more accurate representation of Lancaster. Overall, a really, really nice looking kit. Very fine, crisp surface details. Enough interior detail to get away with it, because you're not going to see a lot of it anyway. My only real complaints are, of course, those propeller blades and them only giving the needle-bladed propellers. You're severely limiting the variety of aircraft that can be modeled out of the box. At the very least, if they would have included the paddle and the needle propellers, that opens up a lot more variety of aircraft that you could do. If they went so far as to include, or perhaps follow up with a second boxing with the bulged bomb bay doors and perhaps the later Mark 7 type twin 50 caliber tail turret, you've got even more options that you have aircraft that you can do there. So if you want to pick up one of these for yourself, they are available on the Wheels Wings Estore. This kit does ship for free anywhere in Canada. We also have the Belcher Bits decals and some of the resin accessories which would be appropriate for this kit as well. You can find them all online as well. I am considering building this kit for the store. However, I would want to do a post-war RCAF bare metal aircraft, but of course those all have paddle-bladed propellers. So until I can potentially track down a set of those and motivate myself to do the conversion, we'll have to wait and see. If you'd like to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.